Dr. Richard Coker, who most of us probably know, but Dr. Coker is an associate professor of business and chair of the Management and Marketing Department in the Grove City College School of Business. Dr. Coker is a 1987 grad of Grove City College with a bachelor's degree in biology, and he also holds an MBA from the University of Pittsburgh and a doctorate in marketing from Anderson University. Prior to joining Grove City College faculty, Dr. Coker worked for 28 years in the pharmaceutical and consumer healthcare industries in sales and marketing roles. And he's a frequent contributor to the Institute of Faith and Freedom, as well as other publications such as the American Spectator, writing on topics related to the American healthcare system and the influence of culture in society and business. So let's please give a warm welcome to Dr. Coker.
All right. Thank you very much, Lauren. Thank you for that introduction. Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad to see such a great turnout here tonight, which, well, I hope will be an informative and kind of thought-provoking session for us this evening. I have a few opening remarks, and then we're going to bring up our panelists, have a chance to hear from them, and then spend some time answering your questions as well. So maybe tonight you came here for the refreshments, right, which are right outside the door. You'll have the chance to take advantage of those after the program. And we thank the Institute for Faith and Freedom for sponsoring those for us. Maybe you came tonight for some extra credit, hopefully, right? The professors maybe helped you out there. Or maybe you came tonight for some perspective. Maybe all three. So the refreshments are out there, the extra credit's up to your professors, and it's going to be my job and the job of my panelists tonight to give you that perspective. So why don't we start there? According to Andrew Neighbor, an industrial organizational psychologist, the average person will spend 90,000 hours of their lifetime at work. That's roughly 10 years of time spent just at work. Now, not every hour of that's going to be rosy. Some of it will be challenging, but the environment that you work in will play a significant role in everything from your level of productivity to your physical and mental health. So the workplace today, and the one which many of you are going to enter over the next several years, has changed dramatically. How we work, where we work, the nature of our work is constantly evolving, right? But nothing has changed and evolved so quickly in the past 5 years as the role business plays in society and the social dynamic inside the workplace. So today, many businesses appear to be more focused on espousing a position for a political or a social cause rather than creating and sustaining value for their customers and for their shareholders. Now, some of that's driven by outside sources like media and a small but vocal minority on social media, but much of it's driven by activist stance within the organization, intent on using the business as a platform. For example, in 2022, the Walt Disney Company took a very public stance in opposition of Florida's parental rights bill, which prohibited, quote, classroom instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through the 3rd grade, end quote. So in response, Disney issued a statement saying, quote, our goal as a company is for this law to be repealed by the legislature or struck down in the courts, end quote. So whose views within the organization are being represented by that stance? In another example, in 2021, Major League Baseball moved its All-Star game from Atlanta to Denver, following the Georgia State Legislature's passage of the Election Integrity Act of 2021. What role does Major League Baseball play in our election laws? Or multiple corporations like BlackRock, Amazon, Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, and many more donated an estimated $82.9 billion to Black Lives Matter and its related organizations. Does this reflect the views of employees and shareholders? We could talk about Target. We could talk about Bud Light. These examples go on and on. So in addition to these examples of corporate social activism, the social dynamic inside many corporations has also changed. Today, the corporate workplace appears to be more focused on individual identity in all its various forms, rather than on developing and leveraging a cohesive and motivated team environment. For example, of the top 20 companies listed on the Global Fortune 500, all but 3 have a detailed diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, statement. Chief diversity officers occupy offices in the C-suite, Mandatory employee training on DEI is commonplace. And in August of 2022, the global consulting firm McKinsey & Company, one of the world's most influential voices in business, issued a white paper called DEI, quote, 3 closely linked values that are working to be supportive of different groups of individuals, including people of different races, ethnicities, religions, abilities, genders, and sexual orientations, end quote. Now, is a diverse workforce valuable? Of course. We've all been created by God with various gifts and talents that can be applied to our work. Diverse perspectives, ideas, opinions, and skills make for a more competitive workforce and a more competitive team. Should we all strive to be equitable, that is, fair and impartial in the treatment of our fellow men and women? Absolutely. In fact, as Christians, we're called to an even higher standard, that is, to love our neighbors as ourselves. Should we be inclusive, welcoming one another as Christ has welcomed us? Always. But these values have been bent in other directions in many modern workplaces to mean something very different. So the changes that I've noted tonight bring with them several challenges for both leaders and employees, because many of the changes we've seen directly challenge both free market principles and a Christian worldview. In particular, important that we have a discussion like we're going to have tonight. So our goal tonight is to alert you to the dynamics happening in the workplace, provide you with some perspectives from Christians who have experienced it, who have been there, and to give you a basis for how to confront some of these challenges. So let me now introduce our panelists tonight. I'm going to invite them to come up and take a seat, and I'm going to first introduce Dr. Andrew Markley. So Dr. Markley is a professor of international business here at Grove City College, where he teaches courses related to global business and business law. He earned his BA in history from Grove City College and went on to earn a law degree from Case Western Reserve University and a Master of Public and International Affairs from the University of Pittsburgh, focusing on the international corporate environment. Outside of the classroom, and as a former collegiate soccer player, you'll most likely find Dr. Markley tracking the goings-on in the English Premier League. Right? So welcome, Dr. Markley.
Thank you.
Next, let me introduce Mr. Ken Wagner. Mr. Wagner is a former Vice President of Medical Sales, Marketing, and Operations for Haleon, a consumer healthcare company formerly part of GlaxoSmithKline. He spent 33 years in the healthcare industry and roles across sales and marketing within the company. Mr. Wagner served on the corporate leadership team for 15 years and was also a member of the company's DEI Council. He's a 1990 graduate of Troy University. And an interesting fact about Ken played football at Troy, had the chance to win a Division II national championship in 1987. So welcome, Ken. Last but certainly not least, let me introduce Margot Fontana. Margot is a 2022 graduate of Grove City College, graduating with a dual major in business economics and business analysis. After graduation, Margot began her career with PNC Bank in Pittsburgh. This is her second year in the corporate banking division at PNC, where she's a part of the healthcare products group. Outside of work, Margot likes to spend her free time cooking, hiking, petting dogs, and spending time with her husband. Hopefully not in that order, right?
No.
Okay. So let's welcome Margot back to campus. Okay, so my role at this point is more or less to let these three talk. So I'm going to try to facilitate some questions. Maybe they get some questions started in your mind. But I know you are, and I am interested in hearing a lot about what they have to say. So let me start with Dr. Markley. So we hear a lot of abbreviations and terms in business today. CSR, ESG, DEI. So could you help ground our understanding of this current environment? What are those terms? What's the theme that really connects those terms?
Well, thank you, Rich. And I think the theme that connects those terms, and we'll talk about those terms in just a second, but I think the theme that connects those terms is this idea that companies ought to serve the so-called triple bottom line. Companies should have an economic bottom line, but they also should have some other bottom lines that they must serve. They have an obligation to serve. So the so-called triple bottom line, and sometimes we hear this in general talked about as people, planet, and profits. So there's the economic bottom line, there's the profit side, but there's also the planet, there's environmental kinds of obligations that companies have to meet. And then people, there are social, societal obligations to various groups of people. And of course we think of employees right off the bat as one of those groups that would be singled out in that category. So the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profits. And then we have these various terms, corporate social responsibility. And the social is certainly highlighted there, but if you read beneath the surface, you'll find the environment is there as well, and maybe some nod to the profit side as well. And then, of course, sustainability, and that maybe originally comes from more of the environmental perspective, but when people talk about the sustainable company, again, a lot of times they're coming back to this triple bottom line, that to be sustainable, you maybe need to earn an economic return, but again, you've got to serve social obligations and you have to serve environmental obligations. And then we have ESG, which comes maybe more from the investing, the finance side of things. And in order to be a good company and a sound company for investment purposes, you have to serve the environment and social and also governance kinds of principles. And of course, in the investing side of things, governance has been out there for a long time. In other words, how do we align the interests of the people who run a company with the people who own the company? When you're talking especially about a corporation, you're talking about the officers and then the board of directors. Governance historically focused on how do you make sure that those officers and directors are managing the company not for their own interests, not for themselves, but for ultimately to serve the people who own the company. But again, governance principles themselves have been more broadly defined in more recent years along the social and environmental side of things. And then of course the E and the S in ESG speak very definitely to the environment and social responsibility. And then DEI, of course, comes in especially on the people side of things and making sure, or the idea is that DEI comes in particularly on the people side.
Okay, so just to build on that, why the big focus on these issues right now? Why are corporations chasing DEI, ESG? Why are they doing that, in your opinion?
And I think we have some long building kinds of causes, and I think we have maybe some more recent emerging reasons for the focus on the so-called triple bottom line. If we look back a little bit more broadly into history, we can certainly think of the environmental movement, and we can also think of the civil rights movement going all the way back to the 1960s. And so there's been many decades of focus on environmental and social issues from that perspective. But then again, I think more recently, we definitely have seen activist CEOs and other corporate leaders who want to push a left-wing agenda on these kinds of issues, and they have found space to do that in some companies in more recent years. So I think that's been a more recent development. And we also, of course, have a number of organizations which are definitely active at pushing more of a left-wing agenda, and we even have some investors who are well known for pushing a more left-wing social and environmental kind of objective. And I can also say that the corporate scandals of I mean, everybody's heard of Enron and WorldCom, et cetera, corporate scandals, and then the financial crisis of '08 and '09. We've had some things happen in the last 20 years which have caused some people to question the functioning of businesses and the functioning of financial markets, and some people have taken away lessons from those types of events and turned that into support for maybe a more activist kind of agenda when it comes to environmental and social issues. It certainly doesn't have to be those corporate scandals and the financial crisis. There's certainly a very different description of what happened and why it happened, but some people definitely have taken, in my view, a wrong message, but some people have taken the message that, oh, there must be something wrong with companies and markets, and therefore we have to go in this new direction of the triple bottom line. Again, I don't think that's true, but some people, I think, have been influenced by that.
So and it seems like the lines are blurred between traditional corporate social responsibility and corporate social activism. Are they the same thing?
Well, if you have an agenda to push left-wing types of views on social and environmental issues, then these kinds of concepts, these kinds of frameworks can definitely be used to do that, but it also can lead people to approach the issue in other very different ways, which in my view would be much more constructive.
Right. So moving away from sort of the traditional role in business of serving shareholders, serving customers, and into taking stances on issues that have nothing to do with their particular product or service.
Right.
Okay. So I want to switch gears, and I want to ask Ken, I want to ask you a question about from the inside, from a leadership standpoint. I'm sure you've seen some significant changes over the course of your career. Could you just give us some examples? Give us a feel for what those challenges, what those changes have been, and maybe what a new employee, for example, might face.
Yeah, so certainly from 1990 when I first started and 2023 when I retired, the corporate world has changed a lot, and my exposure to it changed because of my level. I started out at the entry level, so I probably didn't have a peek behind the curtains like I certainly did when I sat on the U.S. leadership team of a $5 billion company. It certainly, in the last number of years, has really heated up inside of corporate America. I joined the DEI Council, not because I wanted to. My boss came to me and said, I think you're the only one that has a temperament to be the commercial lead on the DEI, and he certainly didn't want to do it. He was the president of the company. And so when I first got that opportunity, it was like, why in the world would I do that? What am I going to do as part of the DEI? I don't even want to be part of it. And in talking to my wife, we were talking about, well, you can only influence if you're part of something. And that was a very unique perspective of, well, if you have a seat at the table, then you can start to ask questions about where the organization is going, why would we think about that, what really is inclusion? And so is it inclusion only of certain people, or should we be inclusive of all? And so there were many things I did throughout my career to try to show people that I was different. And so we were part of a Christian hockey camp, and as part of that, they had bag tags that went on the kids' bags, and they were circular. So when I had an office in Pittsburgh, I had those as coasters. And so when people would come in my office, well, I couldn't have a Bible laying out or start talking about Christ. I could certainly hand them a coaster. And that usually started questions with people about, well, what is Christianity and why do you follow God? Or I knew there was something different about you compared to other people. And so there's just a lot of little things you can do. And I'm just thinking about when you first start your career, you certainly can't go in there and start trying to change the whole organization. You can choose the places you want to work. And so when I talk to some of the classes here, some of the capstone classes, I talk a little bit about culture matters. And you may not be able to get that on your first job because you're probably trying to land a job the first time, but you certainly can get that on your second job. And look for a company that has culture, or look for a company where you think you can help their culture and help other people and make a difference. And I think that's probably the two paths that you have where you can actually make a difference.
Okay, good, that's great. And I want to hold that thought when we get to Margot, because I know you have some unique experience as a new employee, right? A couple of years into your job. So Ken, as a leader, right? You had several hundred people under your purvey at Haleon. How can a leader be effective in an environment that's focused on individual differences instead of commonalities?
It's a great question, and I think what you'll find when you get out in the corporate world is there's a corporate objective, right? So there's things that the corporation is pushing, but the corporation is made up of a bunch of individuals. And so what I have found in my experience is I have a lot more in common with people than corporate America would lead you to believe. There's a lot of folks that may be the silent majority sitting out there that are afraid to talk about it. They don't want to bring it up, but when they find a friendly face, they'll start to talk about it. And I would say what I tried to do is find those groups of people that I had common beliefs with and tried to become closer with them so we could influence what was happening within the organization. And we were just talking at dinner a bit about how, right now, I think the pendulum actually is swinging a bit back because it got a little bit crazy in 2020 in corporate America, and as it's swinging back a little bit because people are saying, well, you talked about the triple bottom line, but they're really, at the end of the day, for shareholders, for people that own your stock, there's really only one bottom line. And so when your numbers are affected, think about some of the things that are happening with Bud Light, and we were just talking about this, that Bud Light just signed, they're trying to rebrand their entire organization by the deal that they just signed the other day. And so I do think, though, you spoke a little bit about this in your opening, is I always approached it as a Christian. I have two commandments: to love my God and to love others. I don't love others if they look like me or act like me or have the same beliefs as me. So how I act but I also have a line of what I'm not going to get pushed around as a Christian. So I'll be unapologetic about the fact that I'm a Christian, and you can do that in corporate America. You just have to really think about it. I certainly wouldn't show up my first day and start doing that, but I would certainly think about my path through an organization and the influence that I want to have as I move through my career.
So it's a matter of staying true to your faith, exemplifying that, and when you do that and you do it long enough, people are going to notice.
Right, and I think people notice there's something different about you, and so it's listen, I sat on the DEI Council. I had many challenging conversations with people. I actually had the best diversity numbers in the company on my team. I had the most female employees. I had the most people of color on my team. And so I just looked at it as we're going to look and try to hire the best people possible. It wasn't an agenda that I had. It was, if you walk through the door with skill sets that can help this team, I want you to be part of this team. And so that was just the philosophy that we had on the team. And so you start to build credibility over time, and people challenge you less and less as you build that credibility.
Okay, great. So talking about the entry into the corporate world, what that might mean, what it might entail, I want to follow that up with Margot. So, Margot, what was that experience like for you? Did number one, did you feel prepared? Were there anything that, sort of smacked you in the face when you got there? What was your experience like, and maybe what can students expect?
Yeah, so there was a lot that I did feel prepared for, and there was a lot that smacked me in the face. So I'll first talk about the ways that I did feel prepared. And so for starting, I just want to say I hope that everyone can just take a moment to realize how amazing it is that we can have a conversation like this on a college campus, because this conversation is not happening at other college campuses. Having 4 conservatives in a room talking about corporate America is not happening on other college campuses. And I know a lot of you appreciate Grove City, but I've appreciated Grove City so much more after graduating. And I think it's something where you can't explain to a fish that it's in water, you don't even realize what you're immersed in until you're all of a sudden kicked out of it. And I love Grove City when I was here, but since graduating, I love it so much more. So that being said, I felt so prepared in the way that my faith was so edified when I was here, in ways that I didn't even realize, that you are just immersed in the Word, you're led by professors who are not just teaching you, but who are mentoring you. You're surrounded by believers. I know they have 24/7, 24-hour worship. I think that's coming up this week, right? But like, I've thought about it. I bet that there's 24-hour worship happening here every single day. There's someone in some dorm somewhere on this campus worshiping. I genuinely believe it. So all those things being said, Grove City could not have possibly prepared me in my faith any better to be able to stand firm in corporate America, as well as the academics. You're not finding academics better anywhere else either, and I'll stand by that any day. So as far as the rigor, the workload, just the general organization that it takes to survive as a student here made me entirely prepared for corporate America. But I was so not prepared for corporate America. And in that I mean that I had gone to a public high school, North Allegheny, a lot of people know it. I was like, okay, huge public high school, tons of people weren't Christians. I was used to not a Christian environment for 13 years of school, then I just treated myself for 4 years at Grove City. I'm totally ready to go back to the non-Christian thing. It's not like I'd been in my Christian cloister for my whole life, it was just 4 years. So I was expecting, I think, more apathy toward faith in corporate America, because I think that's what I felt in high school, where it was like lots of people just didn't care about faith. If you were a Christian, that's totally fine. In fact, I think in high school, a lot of people wanted you to think that they were a Christian. Like, it was still viewed as a good thing to be a Christian in high school. And like people who, even if they were the Creasters, the Christmas, Easter, it was like, oh, of course I'm a Christian. And no one wanted to be an atheist. That was a bad thing in high school. And I'm not sure how much of it is just the times have changed over the 5 years of me being in high school to them being in the corporate world, or how much changes in those 4 years when people go to their indoctrination boot camps of state schools. But it is wild in corporate America, and it is not apathy towards Christians, it is a true disdain for Christians. It sometimes feels like bashing Christians is a badge of honor. It's like the only people group, except now I think you consider Jews also part of that group in recent events, that it's okay to speak poorly of. So I've been in rooms of lots of conversations where there's jokes about people who believe in God, there's jokes about people who wait to have sex until marriage. Well, I got married at 22, anyone can do the math there. And there's a lot more to fight than you realize. And so in that way, I wasn't expecting it.
So how did you deal with that?
So that is a great question. I think I really started taking my faith all the more seriously and realizing how rooted I needed to be in the Word, and also really woke up to how important Christian community is. Because again, you take it for granted when you're here. You don't even have to think about Christian community because it's available to you. And even if you don't want Christian community, guess what? That's what you have. But once you don't have Grove City as your campus, you really have to work for that. So for that meant getting more involved in our church, really investing more in our Christian friendships. Something I've said jokingly is like, the people that I didn't really hang out with at Grove City, or that I didn't really want to be friends with at Grove City, I would rather be working with them any day of the week than some of the people I'm working with, because you just take for granted sharing a fundamental Christian worldview with. So just had a better appreciation for that. But of course, the point about all of us being corporate America is that we're sharing our faith. And I love that my coworkers don't know Jesus, because I know that I'm one of the only people that they're interacting with on a daily basis that actually has a relationship with Christ. And to me, that's what motivates me every day for work, and that's what being corporate America is about for me.
So based on what you said, do you think that the balance of faith and career can happen?
Absolutely. I think you look at how did corporate America get to be the way that it is, it's because people check their faith at the door, and I'm not going to do that. But I think Ken hit the nail on the head that you can't change anything if you're not part of it. And so I think there's lots of opportunities that Christians kind of have to make a decision between three things. Are you going to abstain from the whole situation? Are you going to conform? Or are you going to redeem? And at Grove City, the conversation of redemptive everything that's like the terminology and lingo you live in. And I think that having the perspective of you're in it to redeem, you're not just going to abstain, but you're going to redeem is really what that has to be. So for me, that means being parts of those uncomfortable conversations, building relationships with people, building friendships with people who don't share a single similar worldview, and just trying to show them that even if we're never talking about Christ, they know that I'm a Christian, and showing them that this is how a Christian behaves, not whatever you think that a Christian is.
Okay, great. And so same question to Ken, right? What advice would you have in terms of balancing faith and career? We all want, that first good job. We all want to start our career off in a way that will enable us to have success in the long term. How do we do that and balance faith at the same time?
Yeah, So when I entered corporate America, I wasn't a Christian, and so I didn't go to Grove City. My wife and I didn't come to Christ until we were in our late 30s, and so it wasn't even that long ago. So 20 years ago for me. For me, you just can't check your faith at the door. You can't. And so once I became a Christian, I was a Christian, and everything that I did, even if I couldn't come out and stand on stage at a big meeting and say, hey, I'm a Christian, let me tell you, I would talk about servant leadership, and I would talk about all of the things that lead people back to. And then because I was in such a high position in the organization, people were always watching me, and so I made sure that I was always doing the right thing, because the first thing they're going to bash is, well, I saw Ken, boy, he had 4 drinks the other night at a meeting, and he stayed out late, so I was always conscious of, I'd have maybe a glass of wine with a group, and I would head to bed and head to my room. And so I can't say this enough, you may not be able to go in and start talking about your faith on day one, but you should never change the person that you are. Should never. So when you walk in the door, you are who you are. You have every right to be a Christian in corporate America. You have every right to talk about your faith, not jam it down people's throats, because I don't even think that's what we're called to do. We're called to plant seeds. And so I used to think about, well, why am I even in the role that I'm in? And I used to think about, well, if I could just plant seeds with people, right? Who knows who comes to Christ through those seeds? And that's what we're called to do as Christians, is to plant those seeds.
So either to Ken or Margot, how important is doing the research up front to kind of understand, where you talked a little bit about that in terms of, hey, I'm going to graduate in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, I've got to start looking for a job. How do I factor this in?
I want to clarify, you mean like picking a company to work for?
Yeah, finding a fit.
That's a good question. Well, they're all pretty progressive. They're a big company, so I don't think that you're going to find a big corporation that's publicly held that's going to perfectly align with your values. But I think the best way to figure out what a culture is really like is to talk to people who are from that company. So the Grove City Career Services Office, a plug for them, they're fantastic. Even though it's a small school, there are Grovers everywhere. So I try to have a conversation with someone who is of like mind that's there. At PNC, where I work, it's obviously a big corporation that does a lot of the social justice things that you'd expect. But it also, a lot of the things that are social justice-y are not shoved down my throat. I'm not forced to go to pride parades. I'm not forced to have pronouns in my bio. I'm not forced to go to any sort of social justice events, discussions that I don't want to. So that's something that I'd say, yeah, I don't feel like I'm sacrificing any of my values, but at the same time I have a line, like Ken said, of the things that I know that I won't sacrifice. So I think you need to talk to people to see what it's like for them, and you also need to decide before you go into these situations and before you go to your companies, what are your non-negotiables, because I have them and you need to have them too.
And I just might add, so one thing that happened to me probably like 4 years ago, the organization isn't always overt in how they do things, right? A lot of things are just happening behind the scenes, people are pushing it. And so one great example is probably in 2019 or 2020, there was a new email template that came out to the whole organization and had a space for your pronoun. And I started noticing, like, I didn't even notice it at first, but all of a sudden I'm getting emails from people that had pronouns on them. Like, that's a little strange. Why are people putting pronouns on their emails? We never did that before. I pulled my team together, so I had a pretty large team, and basically said, listen, pronouns are optional, right? So if you want to put a pronoun on there, you could do that. I can't tell you you can't do that, but you are not required to put a pronoun on your email. And so it just takes courage to push back, because as people started, and I worked on so the leadership team at the company I worked for, almost every person on the leadership team went to an Ivy League school. Okay? I didn't, right? Almost all of them are not Christians. There are a couple that they may or may not be Christians. We didn't talk about it, but I think they could have been. You've got to find your tribe and figure out how do you push back. And so I would connect with people that I knew thought similar to what I would think about that example, and push back. And so I just retired in August, or actually I guess it was September of this year, from the company that I work at. And I signed off, he is greater than I, as in my pronoun space. in the letter I sent back, because everybody sends something to the organization, and so it was kind of my way to leave. But I got so many messages from people after, thank you for putting that on your email. So I put Ken, because I never put my title, and underneath it I just put he is greater than I, and it was just my way to kind of sign off and say, hey, everything you've seen is because of him, not because of me, and give the glory back.
Yeah. So similar question for you, Andrew. As students go to look for jobs, examine companies, is it apparent that triple bottom line is a part of a company? How do we kind of understand where a company's headed with that regard?
Well, certainly these days, if you go to the website of any significant sized company, you will see corporate social responsibility report, sustainability report, corporate citizen. I mean, there's different titles, but many companies produce reports, and so you'll get a little bit of a glimpse into the organization that way, because again, pretty much everybody these days produces some kind of a report, whatever kind of terminology they use.
Okay. So before I open it up to your questions, hopefully you're thinking of a few questions. Maybe this has opened your mind a little bit to some opportunities to ask questions of folks up here. Let me just sort of summarize a couple of things that I heard that may be good starters for advice. Okay. Number one, do your homework. I don't mean your stats homework or that sort. Do your homework on the companies you're interested in. Do your research, do your due diligence, find out more about the company you want to work for. Is it a place where you think that you'll be a good fit, where you'll be happy, will be able to do the kinds of things in the ways that you that are consistent with your values? So number one, right, do your homework. Number two, once you have that job, once you're employed, treat everyone just like a human being, right? Not because they look like you or sound like you or talk like you or have the same beliefs, but because they're human, right? Because they are created in the image of God. And then thirdly, have a line that you won't cross. It's easy to say in a classroom, oh sure, I'd walk away from that company if that wasn't something consistent with my values. But when you have a new family or you have other responsibilities like a mortgage and a car payment, that's not that easy to do. But establish for yourself a line you are not going to cross. And if it comes to that, then you're willing to walk away. Would that be a fair assessment? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. Okay, so in the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, it's about 20 minutes to 8, I want to open it up to questions. We'll pass the microphone around. Anybody can address questions as you see fit. So, see if we can. Do you want me to do it? Okay, sure. That sounds good. So, okay, anybody who has a question, hand up.
Thank you guys for speaking. On a business leadership side as a Christian, how do you balance being a Christian leader in an ever-changing world of being more diverse, having to deal with that whole side of the culture? What advice would you give as a leader to balancing the Christian aspect and the diversity and making it into a functioning business?
I'm not a leader.
Well,
Leaders question. I'm not qualified to answer that yet. Hopefully in 20 years.
listen, that balance is, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but in some ways I don't think it is a challenge, right? I think that if you decide, listen, we're all commanded to love others, right? So I don't have to believe, I don't have to have this, society would tell you different because we shout each other down, but the reality is, you know, in a functioning society, in a God society, we care about what other people think, right? We don't have to believe what they think, right? They don't have to believe in the Bible, they don't have to believe Jesus was real, they don't have to believe in God. We still should treat them as Dr. Coker said, as human beings. And so to me, I always took the personal side of people and said, I'm going to be the best people leader that I can be to everyone. not just people that think like me or look like me or whatever it is. And so on the business side of it, it's a bit challenging. You were talking just a minute ago about you can go out to a corporate website and you can see their measurements. And I would tell you, sitting in the boardroom, not everything makes it into the corporate report. And so we literally, inside the company I worked for, on the kind of, I guess, sales side, we measured sales, profitability, market share, probably like five or six measurements that were key to us. We had 4 more pages of social things that we were doing. Now, some of them are great, like environmental. We're going to reduce the number of plastics that we have. We're going to, but there's a lot of things inside of that, I would say, report card that we have as an organization. But I would just say, listen, you got to be true to yourself. You gotta. I always say you have to love others. You have to love others. They don't have to look like me or act like me. They could be coming out of a bar. I should still love them. And I think that's true for corporate America.
Thank you. So we hear a lot about affirmative action in terms of universities. Do you see any examples of that in corporate America these days?
Okay, Ken will expound. So I'm friends with a lot of people in recruiting, and they do have to reach quotas for their hires in internships and development programs. And I know people at senior level management, not necessarily at my bank, but at other banks, where they have to interview a certain number of people from a certain different subsect of either race or gender or sexuality for their interview process to even be valid. So it's not necessarily that their team has to reach a quota, like whoever's hired doesn't necessarily have to hire a quota, but there's a lot in the interview process of having to hire X, Y, Z factor of candidate before the entire interview and application process is considered valid to determine a candidate.
So I say yes to everything that was just said. And I would say that in corporate America, if you do business with the United States government, there are different requirements that are put on your organization. And so we certainly had those within our organization, but I always said we're going to hire the best candidate possible for the role. Interesting, my team had the highest percent of diversity on its team because we weren't looking to hire diverse talent or females or males. We were looking to hire the best talent. And it just so happened if we got the right pool together, we would find talent that was good, that looked different across the organization. To me, as a Christian, that's the way we should be doing it. We should be just hiring the best available talent and giving people an opportunity. So
I'm just going to ask a follow-up question, right? So what business impact does something like affirmative action policies or the interview process that you described, Mario, what sort of business impact does that have? But if you're forced to do that.
I can tell one quick story and then move over. So I had a real life story. I was getting a lot of pressure. I was running the Walmart business for the organization, which is the biggest business in the company. And I was getting a lot of pressure to hire diversity on my team because there wasn't a lot of diversity. And so I got pressure. I knew that this person wasn't the right person for the job. I was getting so much pressure from HR that I gave in and went against what I knew was probably the right decision. I hired this gentleman on a Friday. We went to the Pittsburgh airport on Monday to go to Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas, and so we were getting on a plane. He got on the flight, the first flight, and he had 7 gold chains on. So we're going to Bentonville, Arkansas. He had 6 earrings in, which I missed in that, which is okay. But if you're calling on a customer in Bentonville, Arkansas, you have to probably try to look a little bit like your customer. And I remember how conflicted I was because I flew from here to Charlotte with him, and I wanted to talk about it, and I was like, okay, I have to get up the courage. So we got to Charlotte Airport. I had everything I was going to say, and I couldn't get it out. And then we got on the flight from Charlotte to Bentonville, and I'm like talking myself up. I'm like, all right, here's how I'm going to handle this, because I didn't want it to be really sticky, but I couldn't allow him to walk in there to a more conservative customer without some changes. So I finally had the conversation with him in the Bentonville airport, and he took it off. But he turned out to be the wrong hire, and I knew that up front, but I didn't have the courage. I was younger in my career. I didn't have the courage to stand up to the HR department. And I decided right there, and it was like 2004, I'm like, I will never do that again. And I will, it was a line. I will get fired before I hire the wrong person. And he was just the wrong person for the job. So it affects the business.
So I mentioned I'm friends with some people in HR. So one of my friends at the bank, he was a recruiter. He actually just quit recently, and a lot of this is actually why he quit. But what's really interesting about him is that he is gay, and he would never, I don't think, ever consider himself conservative in any way. He didn't necessarily know that I was conservative, because again, it's just about building relationships with people who are different than you. And at a few of the lunches that we had, he shared how extremely difficult all of the quotas made his job as a recruiter, which I was absolutely shocked to hear come out of someone who you would think, based on his demographic of being part of a minority that is recruited heavily, you would not expect him to have that viewpoint. And I don't think if he was in any other job besides recruiter that he would feel that way, but because he was seeing the real business impacts of that system of quotas, he realized how detrimental it was, where essentially it would be the same story over and over again, where he'd be forced to hire a certain number of whatever group because of his manager in HR, and then he would give those hires to the business managers, and the business managers would say, this person sucks. And he would say, I don't know what to tell you, like I had to hire however many people, and it creates a cycle of dysfunction that isn't beneficial to the business leaders. It's really difficult for the recruiters themselves who don't believe in it. And at the end of the day, the person that it's most detrimental to is the person who is hired unqualified for a job. I don't want to say unqualified, but differentiatedly qualified for a role to be better for a better company, where I'm sure those candidates have their fit. Everyone has a fit in some job somewhere, but if you're hiring people that you know that they're not going to thrive and they're just to meet a number, it's offensive to them as well.
Yeah, let me just add one thing to that real quick. So I had a situation where I had an African American, gay, female working for me. She was awesome, like probably my most incredible employee at the time. And I gave her the highest award and the highest year-end review, and which came with a nice bonus. And we were standing in a Denver hotel, and she started crying. And I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Because I need to know first that this isn't because I'm a female." So it has a negative effect on people, because she was thinking I was giving it to her to make some type of quota for the organization. And I just looked at her and said, absolutely not. I would never do that. I would absolutely never do that. And so her confidence in herself, even though she was awesome, was not as good as it should have been, because she was always thinking she was getting special privilege possibly because of who she was. But frankly, she was our best employee that year on the entire team, and so she got that. So I think you have to be careful of the negative impact of some of these things on people.
Thank you to all our panelists tonight. You talked a lot about working within an organization in light of the leftist agendas, DEI, ESG, what have you, to reform that organization from the inside. But there seems to be an expansion of perhaps conservative reactionaries who are taking a different approach and saying, leave corporate America, we're going to build our own organizations. Both from a potential employee perspective, looking to gain a job, and then also from a market perspective, is this building a conservative-oriented organization, is that the right answer for potential employees and for the market in general?
So, interesting that you see this sort of parallel economy, for lack of a better word. But I think if you go back to traditional diversity, right, that we are all different, but in a universal way, we're all the same. And so leveraging those differences for the greater good is way more powerful than segmenting conservatives over here or segmenting some other portion of the population over here and hoping to make the same impact. A diverse team is a strong team. Diversity, as defined by a diversity of opinion and skills and talents, not necessarily a diversity in how we look or how we talk or how we act. So in that sense, I think that creating something separate off to the side isn't quite as effective as it could be.
I guess what I would just want to add on that too is that when we talk about the triple bottom line and environmental and social and economic bottom lines, I mean, certainly as Christians in business, we understand, hopefully, the economic bottom line side of things, but as Christians, we certainly want to honor God's creation, the environment, and we also want to respect people and take care of people. The question really is, how do you define that? How do you define the principles, the standards, the rules that you're going to apply? And one thing which we haven't really addressed yet tonight, and I just wanted to take just a quick moment to introduce that, is that when we talk about this triple bottom line and ESG investing or corporate social responsibility, in the year 2023, this is not just some kind of nebulous concept that everybody can more or less just decide for themselves what to do. I mean, these days we have detailed standards that are put out there as the standards which organizations should follow. I mean, if you want to take a look at one, look up ISO 26000, right? The International Standards Organization Rule 26,000. And you'll find 100+ pages of detailed description of a whole array of social and environmental issues which a business is supposed to address in order to be socially responsible. And you will also find that a number of those principles or rules would probably just be very surprising in terms of how left-wing they are. And just one example I always use is, so ISO 26000 describes the right of workers to form a labor union as a human right. Not as just a legal right, but as a human right. So right up there with freedom of speech, presumably, and freedom of the press is the right to form a labor union. Well, that's just a small window into the world of these kinds of standards that have been written. And so to come back to the question that was asked, this kind of an issue of what kind of a company are you going to work for and what are they committed to, if it's a company that has signed up to a standard like ISO 26000, then it's a company which is embracing a number of left-wing kinds of principles and ideas, and I think for conservatives, as has been said, there is that real question, and for Christians, there is that real question of making sure that you know where your principles are as a Christian, as a conservative, and making sure that you don't sacrifice them for an organization that you happen to be working for because you're really not quite sure of the basis from which they operate. And the message is that the base can be very left-wing, and you really need to understand that.
The only other thing I would add, just specifically to your question, you got to be careful you don't live in an echo chamber, right? So I think that is the risk. I'm not saying you can't do that, but I think the risk is that if you surround yourself with people just like you, who all believe in Christ, I'm not sure we're doing what we were asked to do, or commanded to do, not even asked, we were told to do, to go out and spread the good news, right? So, if Rich and I are the only people that work together, or Dr. Coker, sorry, and Margot at this panel, or just this group, I'm not sure we're doing that, right? It doesn't mean we shouldn't hang out with these people, but yeah, we isolate ourselves. I don't know if that's doing Christ's work on earth.
So I know we're getting up on time, and I want to be respectful of your time, as well as your ability to snack here coming up. So we're going to be hanging around. The snacks are outside the room here. You're welcome to help yourself. If you haven't scanned your ID, back on the far side of the auditorium, there's a little computer set up with a scanner. Make sure you do that. And if anybody has any follow-up questions or would like to talk more, please feel free. So thank you so much for your time tonight and attention. We appreciate you coming out to hear about this topic. Have a great night.